All right, so you see what I mean when we started and I said we're going to do a different approach to marriage. What we're talking about here, in essence, is our hearts. Okay, that's why it is complicated. The job of a Christian psychologist is to take the things that God tells us about how we relate and live and sort of operationalize them, put hands and feet on them, and add that with some clinical smarts and unpack the way in which God has called us to live. So what we're talking about is how hearts work. What is it that goes on inside of them and how that affects your relationships, okay? So let's keep going. Third eye, imperfection. In other words, dealing with the yuckiness in life, in marriage, in dating. Imagine how much this could be just a talk about dealing with yuck in life. There is a talk on the podcast on forgiveness, a strangely underdeveloped topic given how fundamental it is to Christianity. But how do we make sense? Why is it hard to forgive? Why is it hard to let go of how painful things are? All right? So, let me put it this way. One of the reasons this one is so difficult, dealing with the ways in which my spouse lets me down, or maybe my spouse has really hurt me, or dealing with loss, death, illness, financial problems. One of the reasons that is so hard is because we were not designed to deal with it. In other words, this is the only one of the four that God did not create us to need to do. I mean, Adam and Eve, if they hadn't fallen, would have needed to learn about intimacy and connection and identity and stewardship, and they would have had to make sense of their emotional world, but they would not have had to make sense of how painful life is. We are fish out of water on this one. It's why we all struggle with it, okay? So you bring this to marriage, or you bring it to dating, the struggle with it hurts so bad if you're not what I wish you were, or it hurts so bad when you let me down, or you said something cruel, or I wish that you were willing to hear me now when you're not. You bring that sort of loss and disappointment to marriage, and you can realize, married or dating, if you're waiting for your perfect spouse to come along, bring a sack lunch, because it's going to be a long wait. Norma has a saying. She says, men marry a woman hoping she'll never change, but she does. Women marry a man hoping he will change, and he never does. I told somebody that once at a conference. I said at a conference, somebody said, I think Einstein said that. And I'm like, Norma, Einstein, Norma, yeah. Okay, so real life and real marriage is definitely painful and hard. And as we said, paradoxically, one of the things that makes it harder is the cockamamie things we do when we engage the hard stuff in life. You let me down, so what do? We go into blame and attack and protest that blame marriage that we talked about, which takes one problem that, ouch, there's things in our marriage that hurt, and turns it into two problems. Ouch, things hurt, and now I'm being a jerk about it, okay? That's why we had to address the blame thing first. So, in order for marriages to work, in order for our spirituality to work, in order for our parenting to work, but this is a marriage conference, let's stick with marriage. We have to be taught and shown, preferably as kids, but it's not too late, how to make sense of failure and sorrow and disappointment and loss and keep our poise. And as you can imagine, that takes a lot of pretty strong heart kung fu to do. So, two things again. Can I forgive you? In other words, how do I make sense of the ways in which you let me down? The ways in which the world has fallen, and not go to protest or blame or depression. In other words, can I make sense of the universe stinking, and you too? All right? And number two, can I forgive myself? And this is that other side of this, and that is, have I learned the ability, and again, this is an ability we learn, to take in grace for good enough to be good enough? Can I be standing up here and be thinking, I think I'm doing a pretty good job at this conference. I don't think it's the greatest conference in the world, but I think it's good. Can I have grace? Can I feel safe in not being perfect? Okay? That is a skill that we have to be taught. All right? Huge in marriage. So let's look at them. Forgiving our spouse, forgiving the universe for stinking. How do I deal with the fact that you're often not what I long for, or you forgot our anniversary, or you are missing me when I'm hurting. Let's put some faces on this. One day I was talking to Norma when we just had two grandkids, our grandsons, and I was telling her, I said, I miss the grandboys so much. And it was a Monday night, and she goes, well, you're in luck because I'm keeping them on Tuesday afternoon, and if you come home from work, you'll get to hang out with them and play and wrestle on the ground and all that before their mom comes and gets them. And I'm like, excellent. So Tuesday afternoon comes, and you can imagine a therapist's life is kind of back to back. I mean, if you get late early in the day, you're late the rest of the day. So I'm aware I need to leave work on time because I need to get home before their mother gets there. So all Tuesday afternoon, I'm like, okay, it's 10 till. Session over. You're out. Let's go. You know, and my office manager's like, so-and-so, so-and-so. I'm like, tell them I'll call them back. And I'm working all afternoon to be on time, because I got to leave. And I get in the car, and I call Norma as I blast onto the freeway, and I'm like, I'm on my way. And she goes, oh, I changed my mind, and I'm not keeping them today. Do you feel it? Do you feel it? That feeling? That's what marriage feels like. Right there. What is that feeling? What do you want to say to her? On the other hand, to be fair, Norm and I have been married about a week home from our honeymoon. We lived in this creaky little old 1920s duplex in the Bellhaven area of Jackson. And we were both getting ready for bed upstairs one night, and we hear this ka-thump, ka-thump downstairs, and both look at each other like, did you hear that? Yeah. And she goes, what was it? I'm like, I don't know. And she goes, well, it could be the boogeyman. And I'm like, I know. So she turns to her Conan, her Captain America, and she's like, well, go see. And I'm like, no, it might be the boogeyman. And she says, well, my daddy would have gone and seen. I'm like, let's call your daddy. That's a great idea. He can come over. Just to be fair. Or something darker, like a couple I was seeing once, and she was literally dying. She had cancer, and it wasn't going well. And their conflict in their relationship went way up because they were in agony. And they fought more because their pain was infiltrating everything. Or how about real betrayal? How do we recover from somebody really betraying us? Again, listen to the forgiveness talk, or have me back for marriage 2.0. How do we make sense of the injury that comes from forgiveness? So this can go as deep as you want it to go, okay? Which we don't have the bandwidth for tonight. We're going to focus on how do you deal with the yucky disappointments in marriage. If you want to go deeper into making sense more of deeper injuries, we can try to do that during Q&A. I'm glad to do that. But how do we make sense of the ways in which our spouse lets us down, the losses, the pains, without losing our noggin? I'm going to spend a little time on this and give you 4 categories that I think are important because all of us struggle with this. None of us do it well. And I want you to have some categories to think about it with, okay? Again, this literally is a whole talk, but I'm going to give you sort of a sketchy version of it just because I want you to have it, all right? Step number 1 of how do I deal with making sense of my spouse's letting me down, Norma changing her mind about the grandchildren. She told me this week, she said that there was money in our health savings account to pay for my cataract surgery. And my cataract doctor's a friend of mine. My office is at the hospital. I see him at lunch. And we start getting these insufficient funds letters. She botched it. I'm bouncing checks to this guy. And I'm like sitting there at lunch going, dude, you're going to get a bunch of letters about how I'm bouncing checks. I was humiliated. Anyway, how do I not take that out on Norma? How do I engage the ways in which my spouse disappoints me or hurts me without going, what are you thinking? I told you this. How do we not do that? Step number 1, I'm going to call humility. In other words, let's put things in perspective here. We're about to talk some about poor you who has to deal with all of the ways in which your spouse lets you down. It really is sad, isn't it? All of their jerkiness and forgetfulness and insensitivity. But here's a little question that I like to ask before we go there. And I think this is a question within healthy psychology, and it is a question within God's universe in a big way, and it is this. What am I a greater expert on? My badness or theirs? In other words, if asked to give a little presentation, which would be longer? My little cutie meme about my own badness, or my seminar about hers with PowerPoints and handouts and breakout group discussion about all enormous faults, okay? In other words, I think before we really engage the issue of how do I deal with the ways in which my spouse lets me down, we need that context that says, really, what am I a better expert on? I think this is what Jesus is talking about when he talks about the log in your eye, okay? And notice he says, and until you get the log out of your own eye, you can't even see to get the speck out of your brother's eye, okay? So I think part of making sense of our losses with our spouse is the humility that says, really, is living with me such a carnival cruise? Have I ever forgotten and changed my mind about the grandchildren? Have I ever told her it was okay to do a check and it wasn't? Where's that humility? That is an essential part of our growth as Christians and as spouses. Okay, we got to start there. Number two, though, and we're going to talk more about the actual resolution here. Number two, basic secret of the universe. And this applies to deep loss, but also to just disappointments in marriage, ways in which your spouse may never be all that you wish they were. Norma hates it when I say this, but I have a little saying, every marriage is at some level an exercise in disappointment. Okay? She says, well, not ours. I'm like, yeah, honey, you're right, not ours. Of course, you're married to me, so of course it doesn't feel that way to you. Here's the secret of the universe. The only way that you're ever going to metabolize loss or pain in your life, be it depression or injury from your parents or ways in which your spouse has hurt you or whatever, is you got to do it with someone else. I don't even know why this is true, and I should because it's my job, but for some reason God made us in such a way to where if my pain is brought into a relationship, for some reason it gets better. It's one of the reasons therapy works, okay? Therapy doesn't just work because of the amazing wisdom of Dr. John L. Cox, okay? Maybe a little. But overall, therapy works because God creates to where pain alone is doubled and pain with someone else is halved. With is God's favorite preposition, notice. He's always saying it. I'll be with you. Walk through the valley of the shadow of death. What, I'll make it all better? No, I'll be with you. Emmanuel, God with us. Lo, I'll be with you always. With is this place of connection. We'll talk about this a lot more regarding intimacy tomorrow, okay? But pain itself will not harm us. Pain alone will. And one of the things that therapy does is make pain be something you bring into a relationship, because our culture is not a place where it's safe to bring pain into a relationship anymore. So we've had to invent things like therapy, okay, which is great. But pain brought into a relationship actually can make us stronger. And so we need places in our lives where we can say, here's a way in which I was hurt and I want to talk about it, and somebody to help you with it, okay? I mean, Romans 5 tells us that pain in a relationship actually makes you stronger, makes you better. What? Pain produces perseverance, and perseverance, proven character, and proven character, hope. Is that how it goes? I think. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so bottom line is, if we encounter pain and we really want to get serious, I'm constantly hurt about how my spouse doesn't hear me. I'm constantly hurt by how my spouse is controlling. I'm constantly hurt about the ways in which they forget things that are important to me. We need to have relationships in which we metabolize those emotions, or you won't be able to let go of them. Okay, that's a fundamental part of forgiveness and of healing, all right? Another way of saying it is healing alone, this is a John Coxism, healing alone is an oxymoron, like jumbo shrimp or legal brief or military intelligence, okay? In other words, healing alone, it's like it doesn't work, okay? So bottom line, part number 2 is you got to talk to somebody about it, okay? Parts of us that are left disconnected get worse, okay? I think we'll talk about that a little more later on tonight. Now, third, this is cool, all right? This is way cool. If you are humble and you have engaged in relationships, then what will happen is you will develop one of the coolest abilities in the world, which I want to write a book on this, baby. And that is, you will develop the ability to feel grief and sadness. Sounds like fun, right? But that's because our culture has turned grief and sadness into something, well, we don't talk about it. And when we do, it's usually to discourage it. Like, oh, don't be sad. Or somebody's gone through a big loss, and we're like, how are they doing? I don't know. They're not doing so good. Because sadness is bad, right? Wrong. Let me tell you about sadness. My job is the job of emotion. Like a car salesman job is the job of cars. And he could tell you the difference between a Tesla and an F-150 and an Audi A8, and he knows all the different things about them. Well, that's what we're like about emotions. We know all about them, and they're very different. But there's one emotion that's different from all the others. Sadness and grief are different from any other emotion. And one of the ways they are different is because sadness is a progressive emotion. It's a transitional emotion. It moves. You can feel depressed forever. You can feel anxious forever. You can feel angry forever. But if you feel sadness, if you feel grief, you will move. And I don't even know why. I think it's something God gave us, like when he threw us out of the garden, like a first aid kit, like something to make your pain metabolize and heal. It's like, you guys are going to need this, like something to heal us. All right, so my brother died 34 years ago when he was 27 and I was 29. And that was 34 years ago this month. And if it was 33 years ago this month, I couldn't talk to you about it without crying. And I can feel tears behind my eyes right now, but they're not the tears of that jagged razor edge horror of initial obscenity. There are tears that are metabolized. They've healed. They're different. Do I miss him less? No. Do I love him less? No. What's the difference? God gave us this thing called sadness and grief to allow us to move from a place of this pain hurts me in a way I can't manage to a place where this pain is something. I think about my brother now, and those tears right now are washed in kind of this wistful, sweet, missing love. And sort of a smirk because my sister and I are kind of, as you can tell, we're a little out there. And Mark was really sweet, and we would always say, I don't think he'd let his kids play with our kids, Anyway, I feel these warm things. Why? Because grief does its work. Grief is so underestimated, and and one of the reasons is because don't realize that once you enter it, where you give up protest, where you give up anger. Anger is a way to not feel grief. Anger is a way to protest. Norma, I can't believe you didn't put that money in that account. Instead of, I'm sad. I can't believe you changed your mind about the grandchildren. Instead of, I'm very, very, very sad because I wanted to see them so badly, and I worked really hard to make myself be able to see them. That didn't work, and I'm just a limited human, and so is she. And limited humans don't get what they want a lot. Is that not sad? And if you can engage it as sadness, what will happen is it will get better. If you engage it as anger, it will get worse. If you shut your heart down, engage it as depression, it will get worse. But for some reason, sadness moves us. It's one of the reasons the Bible talks about sadness so much and grief. It's always talking about it. James is like, leave the house of joy and go to the house of mourning and sorrow. Let your laughter be turned to weep. And it's like, wow, James, I want to party with you, Why is he telling us that? Why is it in Psalm 85? He who goes forth scattering seeds of sorrow will come back in the morn, leaping, carrying sheaves of grain. I think it's 85, maybe it's 84. Anyway, what's it saying? It's saying what I'm telling you, there's this fruit that comes from sorrow. And if we can harness it, a lot of the job of a therapist is to pull you out of the ways in which we're hiding from our pain and let you actually start to be sad. And if you're sad with somebody else, remember, grieving alone is an oxymoron. If you're sad with somebody else, it starts to get better. And like I say, I don't even know why. It humbles me to talk about it. It is a gift from Jesus because he loves us. If we were able to feel sad, it's Psalm 126. It's written here in my notes, sorry. But I bet Psalm 85 is cool too. I'm spitballing there, but I think, if we would be willing to feel sad, an unwillingness to feel sad is what leads us to sin. Why do I take what I want? Because I don't want to be sad about not having it. If Adam and Eve had let themselves be sad in the garden, we wouldn't be sitting here today. If they had said, oh, by golly, that tree, this fruit, it's just appealing to the eyes and profitable to make one wise. I want it so bad, but we can't have it. Father said we can't have it. That's so sad. But I still don't mention the fact that we've got every other tree in the garden we could eat with, but we don't talk about that, right? But we want that one. If they had been sad, we wouldn't be here. If you follow truth, you will be sad, and that will heal. If you really follow truth, you might even be called a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. I want to introduce that category for you. And if I can be in a marriage, and when I found out that I was bouncing checks, I've told y'all some of my failures. What I did the other day was I said, we'll talk about this tomorrow on conflict. Number one, don't say anything, John. Because I'm thinking whatever you say is going to be a snarky, ugly comment. Put yourself in timeout. And I said, okay. Can we talk about this in a little bit? Which was translated as, I'm going to say something really ugly that I'm going to regret, so I'm just not going to say anything right now. All right. And I thought, what is your problem, John? And it was, I'm embarrassed. That was what it was. Can you be sad that you were embarrassed and not take it out on her? Yes. And then I actually saw him later on in the hospital, and I told him, and it kind of, anyway, if we engage sadness in our marriage, think what it does to our conflicts, our losses. Now, notice that's number 3. After we've done that in connection, don't go off and say, well, I'm just going to be sad about all the ways my marriage is not what I wish. A lot of sad stuff, okay? I didn't even mean that to be funny, but it kind of was, wasn't it? All right. Ask questions about sadness. People always want to later on. Please feel free to, because I think it's the secret of the universe. Okay? It's one of the most godly things we can do. All right. Fourthly, after you've done all of that work, you can do number 4, which I'm not going to talk a lot about because I want more time for Q&A, and that is we can move to something that is bigger than our events. In other words, can I be grounded in the fact that even if Norma lets me down, I know she loves me? Even if Norma lets me down, I know God loves me? Even though I have losses in my marriage, I have a sense of self in me, of who I am, my own heart? In other words, am I so small as a person that all it takes is all of a sudden there's a traffic jam or some guy who cuts in front of me and I'm like, what are you doing, you idiot? Am I that small? Is that all there is to me? Can I not lean more on who God is and who I am? It brings up this 4th question of where is my grounding? As I engage the losses and disappointments with my spouse, am I giving them so much power that all they have to do is forget that the grandchildren are supposed to come over and I'm like dancing like a marionette? Or can I engage the fact that Norma misses me sometimes and doesn't get me in my heart sometimes, but I know that there are body of Christ people who do, and my God does, and I can feel the strength in my soul even if she doesn't right now? Can I live grounded in that? Okay? This is keep you in a sense. It's that battery pack that says, even if you guys don't think my conference is amazing, can I feel good doing it? Can I feel grounded in me doing it and in God doing it? Now, notice, this is number 4. Okay? In our Christian community, we lead with number 4. You have a difficulty, you have a loss. Where do we go to first? Well, God's in control. Well, all things work together for good. And we start pushing them to those other resources first. You're right, but your timing stinks. All right? Step number one is be with me. I want to hear you. Sure, the humility thing, but let's be connected. I want to know your pain. I want to be with you in it. Let's grieve together. And then, oh yeah, by the way, all things work together for good. And by that time, once you've done some of that preliminary work, then you can let in those truths. Do you ever wonder why people who are in pain don't want to hear Bible verses? It's because your timing is out of order. Okay, the Bible verses are great, but you have to have the connection and the grieving first, right? It's important to me that my marriage conference go bigger than just how y'all talk over cereal in the morning. I want you thinking about issues of your souls and of your hearts and of your character. That is my point. What will make your marriage better is for you to go home going, I need to learn what sadness is about. You do that and you will change your marriage. I need to have people in my life who I can connect with better when I'm hurting. You do that and it'll change your marriage. It's a different approach to a marriage conference, granted. But it's what I've learned after 40-something years really helps people heal, all right? Next, can I forgive me? And that is, these are the people who live in that perfectionistic, guilty rat race, the perfectionistic Christian rat race. I don't want to have you over unless my house looks like a garden and gun photo shoot. I don't want to tell you about my heart because I feel like I'm kind of worse than other people, you know, or singles who nitpick themselves to death because if I was only cuter, I'd be married, you know, that kind of thing. And usually, again, we weren't created to deal with this one. How am I not good enough? My own badness. We go to either shame or narcissism. And just short answer there, shame is I'm worse than everybody else, and so I feel horrible about it. Narcissism is I feel worse than everybody else, so I feel horrible about it. But I'm going to act like I'm better than everybody else. Okay, that's the only difference, all right? To help somebody who struggles with narcissism, we've got to get them engaged with that shame. So the question is, have we developed the ability to feel forgiven, me forgiven? In other words, can my spouse express their disappointment in me and I keep my poise? Can I hold on to grace? Now again, the only place that we get this is in relationship. Here's another secret of the universe. Just like the only place that we heal pain is in relationship, the only place we get a sense of grace in our guts is in relationship. Do you know that feeling you have? And you're Christian, so I'm sure you know it. And it's where you know something is true, but you don't feel different. I know God forgives me, but I don't feel forgiven. You know that feeling? I know I don't need to be anxious because God's in control, but I feel anxiety, you know? I call that the head-heart gap, and it's what actually got me into psychology in the first place. And it is like, how can I know something in my head, but I don't feel it in my gut? And people say to me, hey, doc, you know, I know I'm forgiven, but I still feel guilty. And what I will ask them is, well, have you ever been in a relationship in which you really screwed up, or you really showed somebody your fallenness and brokenness, and their eyes didn't fall? And they look at you and they go, man, I'm a mess too. Different kind of mess than you, but man, I'm a mess. Welcome to the club. And they go, no way, man. I mean, we were growing up, you messed up. Mom made sure you knew it for the rest of your life. It's like, you know, the sun would go behind the clouds and you would know Mom was mad, you know, and even Dad would run. And what did they learn experientially about grace? Okay? So in order to develop grace in our hearts, we need somebody, preferably not our spouse, again, relationship, who engages us, who sees us, real us, warts and all, and they stay engaged, all right? Then we get to go live that in our marriage. This, again, is why community is so important, that connection thing, which I'll touch on again before we wind up. And that is the only place that we ever learn any of these character abilities is in relationship. I'll only learn grace if you see my fallenness and I see that you don't judge me. I have to experience that, okay? So, to what degree have I taken in the ability to feel forgiven, to know that I let you down, and to not freak out about that? I was picking at Norma one time. All day long, I was picking at her. Everything, she couldn't do anything right. And finally, she stopped and she said, you know what, John, you're right. I made a mistake. And I will make many others. Now, do you hear her there? A, the keep you in. She's staying grounded. The I can hold on to grace inside of me even if you're condemning me. She didn't get defensive. Do you hear how she set limits on a jerky person? She was in essence saying, you can nitpick and criticize me all day, but hey, maybe you haven't know this yet, but I got a belly button. I'm just a human being, and you're going to have to get used to that. It was a beautiful intervention. It shut me up. But it required her to not be in a place where she's like, well, I didn't mean it, which is what we do if we can't keep hold of forgiving me. Okay? Only if we have that ability can I let you down and not freak out. Can I disagree with you and see that you're angry and not need to fix it? You know the old saying, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy? Well, I say we just let mama be unhappy some. Okay? It might help her grow. Okay? Otherwise, what happens, what I see in families, otherwise is you will become a slave. And a lot of people in your family might be really just fine with that. But listen to this. You run that forward, the little pleaser person who, is so afraid of everybody being unhappy with them because they haven't learned to forgive me and hold on to grace. You run that forward in time, and 20 years later, little Mr. or Miss, I'm so good and I keep everybody happy, what we see is they snap. And they get depressed, or they leave, or they have an affair. And people go, oh my gosh, what's happening in marriages these days? Well, one of the things that's happening is that 20-something years ago, little Miss Compliant didn't say, hey, Buster, I made a mistake and I'll make many others. Okay? So I'm going to get out of your blast radius. That's killing marriages. Okay? Having that grounding that says, I'm not afraid of your disappointment. I will stay and work out the problem with you. But I'm not going to cower and be afraid of upsetting you because I can keep forgiveness in, all right? So, see what I mean? Having these abilities is what makes marriage work. Lacking them, and it's game over, man, game over, okay? Now, fourth one. If I didn't manage to get you with the first three, by the way, which I doubt, I'm going to get you with this one. Because this one's the Cuban, baby. This is the Cohiba. This is the Monte Cristo. None of us do this one well. It is impulse control and emotional management. If you want to understand the ways in which, the reason why humans act the way we do, and the reasons we react the way we do, you got to understand the amount of power that emotions have over humans. And once you start paying attention, you find out that a ton of our life and our choices are driven by emotional reactivity. Think about it. The stock market. Economic indicators, my hind leg. The stock market is driven by emotion, fear, and greed. Oh my gosh, we're going to lose money, sell. Oh my gosh, we can make a bunch of money, buy. At least they have the integrity to call it market sentiment. I'm like, exactly. It's sentiment, okay? Both sides of the political climate, right? Whether it's cancel culture or conspiracy culture, or you're being too sensitive or you're not sensitive enough, or, in 2021, we bought all the freaking toilet paper. Who does that, man? In terms of psychosocial development, our culture is about 13 years old emotionally. If you look at it, we're in junior high. Basically, what cancel culture is when you tick off the cheerleaders, and now they won't let you sit at their table anymore. It's like, oh my gosh, you can't sit with us, okay? We're in junior high. Or us individually, why can't you stay on the diet? Emotion. I'm going to stay on the diet now. When I get back from Knoxville, eat nothing but, lean chicken and salads. And then I'm going to go out to lunch with my friends, and they're going to be eating like, chili cheeseburgers where they have to hunch, And I'm going to feel this feeling of deprivation, like, oh, God, that looks so good. Okay, screw it. I'm going to eat a cheeseburger. It's emotion, okay? So most humans, this is fundamental to your marriage. Notice these have become more sophisticated as we go along. Intimacy was easy. We knocked that out in 10 minutes. These are getting harder because we're getting more sophisticated. Most humans don't think or decide what to do with our emotions relationally. We react, okay? So, number one, have I learned the ability to have an emotion and not just act on it? In other words, can I think? And secondly, did I develop the ability to let my emotions be part of our relationship? In other words, can I feel? So, can I think? It starts like this. We begin life as children, and children are concrete thinkers. That's why Sesame Street doesn't talk about the concept of threeness. It talks about 1, 2, 3 cookie, because children are concrete, right? Well, children are also concrete feelers in the sense of a child doesn't, you don't refuse the child the bubble gum at the checkout line, and he goes, what? That actually makes me really angry, and I'm sad too, because I was really, no, they just go, blah, okay, they do their emotions. But somewhere between then and adulthood, some guy can then cut you off on the freeway, and you go, I'd love to run into the back of that guy and teach him a lesson. But you don't, hopefully, right? What happened? What changed? Well, God made us to where we need to develop the ability to have an emotion and not necessarily act on it. Or as we used to say to our kids, you can be angry, but you can't hit your sister. Or as God says, be angry, but sin not, all right? So this is a huge dynamic in marriage, right? So you're driving along the road, guys, right? And your wife says, honey, turn right up here. And we're like, look, I know how to drive, okay? And she's like, whoa, and you start turning green, and she's like, oh, hey, look, sun's getting real low, big guy. Sun's going down. It's going to be okay. What just happened? Well, if you're like most men, what happened is you felt a feeling that was implied by your wife's assistance, a feeling that you're too dumb to get to the church on your own. You need this little woman's help, poor little fella, What you felt was shame, disgrace, and you were like, whoa, okay, I'm not 5 years old. Well, actually, you are, okay? My forefathers crossed the Alleghenies. I ought to be able to, This is what we do because our emotions are driving it, all right? We just react. So can I say I'm scared? I think I'm scared and actually a little angry about how we're spending money, and I'd really like to talk about it rather than, what do you think, I just made of money? Or can I say, it hurt me last night when you didn't advocate for me in front of your parents? Or do we say, why don't you just go live with your mommy since you love her so much? You feel the difference? Okay. 90% of our marriage fights come because we do an emotion rather than feel an emotion. There was a story that I would bring up every now and then about something Norma did, and I'd be, this is like that time when you did so-and-so. And I wasn't bringing it up to attack her with it. I was just bringing it up, and she had done something dumb. And that's objective. It was dumb. She would even say it was dumb, okay? But I'd bring it up, and one day she told me, she said, John, that embarrasses me every time you tell that story. I'm not telling it publicly. I'm just talking to her about it. But she says, that embarrasses me every time. It makes me feel stupid. And I went, really? She told me what it felt like. She didn't go, would you quit telling that story? Okay, you feel it? I want you to have this category for it. Can I have a feeling, back up and think, I think I'm embarrassed because I don't want my eye doctor to think I'm some sort of a slacker bouncing checks on him. I'm about to beat my wife up about it. Great plan, all right? This is called emotional consciousness, all right? And mindfulness is what the hippie woo-woo therapists are now calling it, okay? But it's the hallmark of adulthood, all right? I always tell, and sometimes it's going to take time to do this. All right, we'll talk about this with conflict tomorrow. We may need a timeout. Like I told you, I took a timeout regarding my eye doctor thing. One thing I tell couples all the time, I tell parents this too, is that marriage conflicts should be golf, not tennis. Okay? In other words, think about it. Most marriage interactions are like tennis. Your spouse serves something to you, and we're like, backhand, top spin back at you, okay? And it's like, oh yeah, boom, and we're off, okay? And it's golf, man. They lob something at you like, well, that was dumb. And I want to go, well, who are you calling dumb? No. It's golf. It's golf. Let the ball lie. You don't have to hit it yet. Take your time. Consult your caddy. Unfortunately, she's not going anywhere, okay? You get to decide, move up here to your frontal lobes and decide what you're going to do, all right? Like I say, we're going to talk about this in the conflict talk. But if you are not able to engage a frontal lobe engagement of what I am feeling and decide what to do with it, those emotions will make those decisions for you. And I swanny, as my mother used to say, that if they do, those emotions will be, those decisions will be unfortunate ones, okay? So, how much can I think and not just feel? Number 2, can I feel? In other words, can I be aware of myself emotionally? And I want to save more time for Q&A, so I'm going to skim this one a little bit, but I want you to at least have the category. We're talking a lot about emotion, and psychobabble has turned emotion into sort of this like touchy-feely kind of Mr. Rogers Neighborhood thing, like, oh, you need to share your feelings. That's not the truth. Emotions are what I call your sense of feel. It's not schmoopy-schmoopy. The ability to feel an emotion and know what it is and bring it into a relationship is a tool that gives me information. Let me ask you, kind of like I did earlier this evening, do you feel from me that I'm invested in this evening? Am I phoning this in? No, I am not phoning it in. How do you know that? That's your sense of feel. You have a feeling sense of, John is invested in this. He's having a good time with this. His glasses are bugging him, but otherwise he's really into it. Okay, now how do you know that? Well, just like you have a sense of sight and taste and touch and smell and whatever, you have a sense of feel. You have an awareness of things emotionally. How good are you at that? Develop that. Okay? Is that apology genuine? Does that person feel connected to me? Did that feel like a jab? Does John feel invested? I can feel y'all's investment. Emotion is a feeling, is a way to connect with people just like any other sense. And when people go, well, I just don't do all that emotional, touchy-feely stuff, I'm like, oh, it's kind of like them saying, well, I'm hard of hearing, I can't hear. I'm like, well, you miss a lot. And then you get cataract surgery, and all of a sudden the lights come on. It's like, wow, I've been missing a lot. I see individual leaves on the trees now, despite doing that. But. All right. All right. So you're done. Those are the basic building blocks of relationship, all of them. In other words, I've just deconstructed what makes humans function, okay, and pulled it into pieces. And this is what's behind your marriage problems. Notice how much, by the way, they parallel the image of God. What we've been talking about, intimacy, connection, abiding, love your neighbor, stewardship, faithfulness, obedience, forgiveness, log out of your eye, humility, repentance, saying no to what is evil, yes to what is good, managing my impulses in terms of doing what God calls me to and getting off the throne of my own life and what I just impulsively want to do. Over and over again there, okay? And we serve God well to the degree that we have these, and we will struggle in our relationship with Him and our relationship with each other when we don't have them, and I want you to know what they are, okay? And as you see these tonight, you might see one or two of these where you struggle. The advanced students see all 8 that you struggle, okay? Either way, you're normal. Welcome to the party. And you can see that if we bring those into marriage and dating, that the major reason people struggle in their marriage is not because they just have a bad marriage, it's because we're all missing some of these abilities. I want you to have a grid for what they are, okay? Your spouse did not wake up this morning thinking, I want to hurt him today. I want to misunderstand her today. They're missing some pieces. So I want you to use these as categories to catalog your blind spots. Like I said, a great date night, okay? I think the fact that I can't hold on to grace is one of the reasons that I'm such a maniac when you point out my flaws. Or that I can't be me thing. I'm not good at that. I think that's why I'm always telling you you're trying to control me when you're not. I just don't have a sense of me. I want you to have those categories. But mostly I want you to do that as friends, not enemies. By giving you this model, I want to destroy your ability to say, this is all your fault. I want you to have to say, this is where my brokenness fits into this, and that's where yours does, okay? Because if you've been paying attention, there's one last I. There's one last ability that supersedes all the others. And you've been hearing me talk about it in the background all along. It's the fifth I, and I call it inability. In other words, the ability to live in a position of humility and repentance. You keep hearing me imply it. In other words, can I get into that place where I can say, you know what, we're both a mess, aren't we? We both need to grow, don't we? It's not that you're bad or whatever, it's that we're both so broken. And of course our sinfulness is folded into that. But you want to grow instead of just pointing the finger forever? And singles will say to me, well, how am I ever going to find anybody who has all of these character abilities you're talking about? I'm like, well, you're not. You got me there. There's only one, and he sitteth on the right hand of God the Father Almighty, okay? Otherwise, find someone who has just this one, the ability to be humble and repentant. And maybe he's a Neanderthal emotionally, but he knows he's a Neanderthal. That Neanderthal can grow, okay? Just like this is the beginning point of our faith, it's the beginning point of our marriage. Think about what we do in our faith. What's our first step? We go before God and we go, I'm so bad and I'm such a sinner and I'm in so need of help and grace and I'm so screwed up and I need a Savior. And then we get married and our spouse points out something and we're like, no, I'm not the bad one, you are. And I'm like, whoa, where did all that humility go? I thought you were a Christian. You were the one on your knees a minute ago saying how bad you are. You're still bad. It's just safe. I want to make it safe. This is what I call a Romans 7 marriage. A marriage in which we say, remember Paul in Romans 7? This is what I want you to live and say to one another. The thing, honey, sweet cakes, apple of my eye, the thing I wish I do not do. In fact, I do the very thing I hate. And I want you to say back to your spouse, me too. Want to grow? So, if you can do humble, I can take you to school. We can learn these things. We're going to do Q&A. We're going to talk more about intimacy and conflict tomorrow. If you're not open, if you're committed to being the good one, the one who's got it all together, thank you, Lord, that I'm not like other men. Him. I think Jesus' message to those of us who live self-righteously is, if that's where you want to live, then get yourself a big, tall glass of iced tea and a fun, comfy hammock and sit back and enjoy it, because that's your reward in full. That's all you get for being good, is pretending you're the good one. If you want love, you got to be broken like the rest of us, and your marriage has to be broken. This is what I call a broken marriage, a broken family, one in which we say, I'm broken and you are too. You want to grow together? Now, I've got a ton that I could tell you more about what that growth looks like. We can talk about that all you want, but I want to give you all the ball here. And we got started a little late tonight, so I'm going to go a little beyond 9, if that's okay. Too, boss? Yeah. I want to do questions now, and while they get a pass-around mic so everyone can hear you in a room this size, I'm going to look at my phone and see if any of y'all have texted me a question, and maybe we can grease the wheels a little bit too. Not yet. All right. Don't feel pressure, seriously. Sit for a second. Think what comes up. One of the things that's nice about being a therapist is you learn to grow comfortable with long periods of silence. So, right. Yeah. All right. Any thoughts from me about how one might coach their spouse in figuring out where their blind spots are? Coach you in how to help them. Right. Yeah. Well, that was going to be my first counter question, and that was, has she asked you to take on this role? Darling, would you ask Cox how you can better confront me with my incompleteness? Let me play with you. Let me play with your question a little bit and make it something that you're going to be able to go home and not be in the doghouse. I'm going to get you out of this, man, okay? That's an excellent question, sir. The rule across the board, at least with repentant people, if we're talking about unrepentant people, the rules are all going to change. But with repentant people, the rule across the board is, what am I a greater expert on? In other words, the first question would be, hey, Cox, how can I be learning better where my blind spots are? Okay? But if you and your spouse sit down and say, hey, I want to try to learn some of these. I'm not sure which one of these are my blind spots. Will you help me? I think curiosity together is a good position to take. In other words, we don't know, and we certainly don't want to sit in the seat of Moses with our spouse and go, oh, I know exactly when he said it. I'm like, oh, I knew it was you. I want to more go, okay, I think you're right that I have a total issue with keep you in, because I think that's one of the reasons I can get so cranky when you spend all night talking to the grandchildren on the phone, and I want to talk to you about what I did at work today. I think you're right. I think that's totally an issue I got. But as you're talking about what yours might be, I don't know, sometimes I can feel like you have trouble saying no. What do you think? You feel my vibe? I'm curious with them. We're working together on the same project. How can we help each other? I think that's the vibe. That position of humility says we're co-workers together. I was seeing a couple yesterday, and he was doing some really interesting work about the fact that his family was a family in which emotion was not part of their world. They were just not connected emotionally. And I was sort of working a little more on him. And near the end of the session, she takes on this almost professorial position. She goes, well, one of the things that I've always noticed in his family of origin was that when they did this, and she starts going on and on and on, she actually brought out a piece of paper with notes on it. And he's so disconnected from his emotions, he's like, huh. And I'm like, what are you doing? This is cruel. Anyway, what I told her was, I think it's cool for you to be a part of his growth, but I think it needs to be on his terms. And I think another way to handle what you just did was to say, you know what, I've got some thoughts that I think lean into the story you're trying to unfold. If you ever want them, let me know. And we take this real tentative, real humble position with a repentant person and helping them see their part. Does that fit? Does that feel legit to you, wife? Okay, good. All right. Question? Mm-hmm. Compliant child position. Yeah.
Yes, sorry, compliant child.
Yeah.
And you even mentioned that I think that a client of yours, a patient of yours, who said that he or she wouldn't know who they were.
Yes.
I would imagine a lot of people seem to resonate with that.
Yes.
But that person, is not going to be able to silo him or herself off from a willful spouse, willful children, friends, coworkers, in-laws, etc. How maybe in the case of your patient and others who, see themselves as just for the longest time, here I am, with children, a husband, a wife, whatever, and I don't know what it is to be me. How does that person start to get in touch with that?
Beautiful question. Do y'all comfortable doing the mic so that it can be? I don't know if it's on the recording or what. Are y'all comfortable with that? I would like people to hear it. Did everyone hear his question? Y'all?
I'm not going to record the hearing.
Okay.
But I'm fine for I think I'm just saying that might make them more willing to use the mic.
Good. I got it. I'm cool either way. So y'all heard the question. It's a fabulous question. And I remember I asked my first therapist in L.A. this question when I was like, you know what? I've always just been this good boy, doing what I'm supposed to do, blah, 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 blah. I don't even really feel like I know who me is. How do you learn who me is? Well, one of the things he said in response to it was, well, John, as psychopathologies go, at least yours has gotten you a doctorate. He said, you could have built a meth lab in the basement. And I'm like, well, that's a good point. My need to excel has got me Anyway, what he told me was this. He said, well, of course you don't know who you are yet because you've never asked. You've been too busy asking other questions. Asking questions like, what's going to upset that person, or what's going to make these people proud of me, or what's going to impress those guys, and you haven't started asking, but who am I really and what do I really want? And he said, once we get those scary questions out of the way, the fear of shame if I disappoint other people out of the way, the feeling that I'm little and I'm going to be scolded if I disappoint you out of the way, if I can create a space, and for me it was in my therapy and with some of my safe friends, because this growth takes place in relationships, there was room for my heart to actually start telling me, okay? And it literally emerges. It's like you start noticing, like, oh, I hate that. I've just always done it because you're supposed to, okay? Wait a minute. My 4 categories are not uncommon with people who went to Rosemead, and I changed the 4th one. The 4th one for most Rosemead grads, like John Townsend, Henry Cloud, people like that, is dynamics of authority. And I thought, no, it's impulse control. Something in me said, what everyone else is saying doesn't fit me. Who am I? And if we take out that fear of I'm supposed to be this or they'll be mad if I don't do that, then God made our souls to be who we are, and it will emerge. Now, that has to take place in the context of a relationship. You can't do that alone. And one of the things that I want to do in therapy, let's just use therapy as an example, and we can broaden it to the body of Christ at large more in a second. But what I want to do is say, okay, first let's talk about what's so terrifying to you about getting in trouble or the shame that comes from disappointing people. What's made you want to be compliant so you didn't get in trouble and hide who you are and be a chameleon so that, and what people will start talking about is, ooh, there's so much shame, or people will pull away from me, or I will be alone. And we start to look at those boogeymen that are keeping you hidden. And we start, in the relationship, start healing those and backing them off. Like I'll say to clients, okay, let's think about it. So you have this big fear of going to speak to these people in Knoxville because you're going to bomb and you're going to feel humiliated because you didn't do a good job. Let's go to that feeling together. Let's go look at that shame. I mean, when you're this tall, that kind of shame will eat your lunch. But you know what? You're this tall now and you're with me. Let's go look at that shame. And people start going into it, and they might cry and it might hurt, but they start going, you know what? I walked into that shame and it didn't kill me. I've been living my whole life to not feel shame. I've been giving up who I am to not feel shame, so who am I? And this starts to emerge and you start to learn, okay? So, your question was also about a broader context. These people, parents, children, spouse who are pushing. What I see with people who have pushy people is that there's, again, a growth curve of learning healthy Taekwondo. In other words, I want to teach you to develop the ability to push back. And, I did push back and they scolded me, so what do I do now? Well, let's coach you a little bit more. And there's this coaching process of how do you speak in a kind, strong, limit-setting way to people who are pushy. Like, I actually taught Norma some ways to push back on me because I'm so pushy and controlling. I'm like, I don't want to talk to you like that, and I want you to call me out when I do. Okay? I kind of gave her a stun gun to use on me because I felt like that was the right thing to do. But we help you learn that stun gun, help you learn that ability to, I'm not going to be held hostage by the scary emotions that come if I've disappointed somebody. Now, if I'm no longer held hostage by that because me and John have walked in and looked that demon straight in the eyes instead of spending my life running from him, then all of a sudden we shoot the hostage. There's no hostage. And I can start going, who am I? Okay, so maybe I bomb it in Knoxville, but I really enjoy being here with y'all. And I can deal with any shame I feel, and I got to be real me. Okay? So that shame boogeyman goes away and the real you gets to emerge. Is that good? It's a great question. Yes. Yes, let's talk about that a second. Where does growth come from? Basic principle of the universe is that we only grow in these character abilities in the context of relationship. As I told you earlier tonight, I don't know why God made it that way. I don't particularly like that rule, but it's the only place we grow at that gut level. So, God knows that we're not complete, and God knows that we have to continue to grow and heal and develop areas where we have blind spots, and God knows that the only place we're going to do that is in relationships, right? He's smart, right? So what's he going to have to do? He's going to have to give us new relationships. In other words, your development does not stop in childhood. The body of Christ is the second family. We are the second family. And the degree to which I can bring my heart to safe people in God's community, those parts of me that are incomplete get brought back into relationship and they start growing again. Okay, that's why therapy works. All right? All those each others in the New Testament aren't there because Paul and Peter and all of them are just telling us to be nice to each other. They're telling us that because they're talking about the way the body functions is to actually make us more Christ-like. What's the fifth means of grace? You guys are Presbyterians. You know the means of grace? Worship, prayer, sacraments, Scripture, and what? Fellowship. The redheaded stepchild of the means of grace. Because in our culture, fellowship is like free time between Sunday school and church. It's like, we'll have a 10-minute break for fellowship and donuts. No, fellowship is one of the ways in which God created us to grow. I bring my heart to you. We're doing fellowship here. You're experiencing me as being genuine with you, right? I'm not shucking and jiving with you. I'm being real me with you. When I do a conference, I don't want to do a conference. I want to create a culture. I want to create a context in which we're going, hey, let's be honest and real. We're God's people in the body of Christ. Let's be a safe group, a gracious group, a truth-telling group, a group where we do not share other people's confidence, where we keep privacy, where we tell the truth. In other words, I think, since our culture has completely lost the notion of real community, that we have to have a new community. And I think that community is the church. And everywhere I go, I say this at some point and say, be thinking, looking for relationships with people who are safe, becoming someone who is safe, to hear things with grace, to speak the truth, to keep your confidence, to shift your small groups. One of the reasons that Katie and I wrote the study guide to the one story the way we did is because it's not just about what is God's intervention with Moses at Sinai. It's also, and what does it mean to you that Yahweh would give Moses his name? Talk about how that might be scary to you. I want your small groups to start inviting one another to more openness. I think the church needs to be growing, like this process of growing and emerging of who am I want the church to be growing to become more and more of a place where we say we are keeping each other's hearts sacred. And this is a place where we can start getting complete in all these places where we're incomplete. All therapy is a strategic, systematized form of fellowship. That's all it is. So how do we, and this might not be to your grandchildren that the church looks like this, but I want to plant the seed. I want to move the needle a little bit. The church starts thinking, how do we talk about hearts? How do we bring the ways in which we're broken? How do we wipe the I'm a fine, everything's great Christian smile off my face and start talking to you about real me? Okay? I want that for y'all. I want that everywhere I go. Do that and you put me out of business. Boom. I can open a restaurant because I like cooking as much as I like psychology. All right. Next question. These are such good questions, thought out, thoughtful questions. Thank you. Let me check the box. Nope. Going to have to come to the floor from the floor. Oh, you have a question?
Yeah. Well, you talked about. Oh, thank you very much. No, I gave him a hard time because Brent was talking down here. Brent was doing this. You talked about. Well, yeah. Tell me how you feel. Yeah.
That's so healthy.
Well, I want to be humble, and
okay.
Well, it's about sadness, and it seemed like you were talking about us need to embrace sadness in our marriage, but you said it's not depression. How is there a thin line between sadness and depression? Like how do you not get into depression if you're trying to embrace sadness?
That's a great question. No, there's a thick line between sadness and depression. A very thick line. Let me tell you what depression is, all right? Depression, I mean, of course, there's biochemical kind of depressions and blah, blah, blah. And our culture goes more and more philosophically materialistic in that depression is just a gene or it's just a chemical or it's just whatever. And maybe there's a component of that. But regarding the heart, this is how depression works. Depression works in that I encounter pain or loss or a part of myself I can't tolerate or emotion that I cannot manage. And so I need to flip the breaker switch and shut it off. But the problem is that humans aren't like houses. Houses have a whole box of breaker switches and you can cut one or two off. Humans only have one breaker switch. And if you cut the breaker switch off to your pain, you cut the breaker switch off to everything. And the darkness and emptiness and shut down darkness that comes when you shut off your emotional world to stop feeling the pain is the feeling we call depression, all right? And it's not sadness at all. In fact, one of the cures to depression is to get connected with someone. Well, here's the dilemma for somebody in depression. I'm depressed because I've shut off my pain because it's intolerable. So what are my options? Shut it back on? It was intolerable, as you recall, okay? Or leave it shut off, which is one of the reasons that people in depression can reach such despair, because it's a lose-lose. Well, again, I believe God speaking and psychology speaking both would say the thing that breaks that tie is if you get somebody in a relationship with you, remember, pain alone is doubled, pain with is halved. If you connect with me and you and me walk into that pain together, maybe 2 cents of it this week, maybe 5 cents of it next week, maybe a nickel and a half next week, maybe a quarter, maybe 30 cents. And ultimately, we start to engage that pain together. What happens is, with someone else, if we're connected, I actually can face the unfaceable and cut the breakers back on. But now I'm not in the room alone. I'm with somebody else, and I can grieve. And what will happen is that pain will be something that's not a disaster that feels like the end of my life and there's no answers and there's no hope. Instead, it feels like I am connected in loving relationship. That has made me feel a sense of me. I have that connection with God we've talked about. So there's all this network around me right now as I face this pain. And if I have all those things, I can finally let go and be sad about this thing I've lost. Sadness is the best emotional example of that famous Jim Elliott quote, he is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. Sadness is, instead of living in protest that, Norma's not as responsible with the banking account as I wish, or telling me, when the kids are going to come. Why aren't you different? If I can say, you know what, sometimes it's really sad to long for something and somebody let you down. Can I just be sad about that? Because if I do, especially in relationship, that's going to become less and less and less and less painful. The sadness will heal it. Again, I don't know why. I don't make up the news. I just report it.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
You spoke a little bit on unrepentance and the scope of marriage.
Yes.
The way you would handle that on a more of a broader scale, let's say an unrepentant sibling or parent or friend, is the way that that's handled. You mentioned creating boundaries, so kind of forcing them in a loving way, or standing up.
Yes.
And I was just curious to get your thoughts on what that looks like, a little bit outside.
Good. It doesn't look that different. Y'all hear his question? If you really want to dig into that, listen to the Difficult People Talk on the podcast. I'll mull that slide back up in a second. I think I'm going to do it now. And also give y'all the phone number in case you want it. This is all my growth stuff I'm skipping. There's the phone number if you want it. And the podcast is not up there. Good Enough Living. And it's on most everything, Spotify and Apple. And now we're getting some on YouTube, which is fun. But I asked my tech guy, I said, you're putting me on YouTube? And he's like, yeah. And he said, and we can monetize that. I said, really? Can I have that commercial where that guy puts that spoon on his ear and ding, 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 ding? You know that one? I want that guy. You know it, yeah. Okay, so unrepentant people respond to limits. And a limit can be, there's a hierarchy of limits. So I was talking to a couple the other day, and she mocked me in the session. I can't remember the context, but I'll make one up. She was talking, and she's got a lot of this sort of latent, cruel hostility. She's a very unrepentant person. And I got to be careful because if I engage the unrepentant spouse in therapy and rescue their victim spouse, it'll blow up. But that's another show. But she mocked me. It was to me. It was as if she said, yeah, so maybe we need to grow in these character abilities that you're talking about. And maybe we haven't. Maybe we still have character abilities that we need to grow in. And I said, can I ask you a question? She said, what? I said, are you meaning that for your tone right now to mock me? And she said, what? And I said, your tone right now is very mocking, and I'm wondering if you're doing that on purpose or not. Now, all I was doing there was just holding a little mirror up. Wasn't telling her to stop. I was just calling her out about it. Now, this is not a family member. It's a client, okay? I was staying with some friends when I was doing a conference in another city, and they had a teenage son who's really, super snobby about clothes. And we were all sitting around after lunch, and I think it was these shoes, in fact. My cool Chakas. He said, your shoes are dumb. Now think about what we usually do at that point. What? No, they're Chakas, man. They're awesome. Or, well, your shoes are dumb too. Or, oh, really? No, I feel stupid. Okay, in other words, we go counterattack, pitiful victim, defend myself. All right, good taekwondo with a difficult person I used a mirror with him again. I love a mirror with a difficult person. He said, your shoes are dumb. And I said, and I've noticed that you think a whole lot about what other people wear. He was silent. They don't know what to say if you just point it out. All right, so there's a million of them. There's limits you can set in terms of activity with them. I encountered a client years ago who's had a relative, whoever, if they saw pictures of her family or their kids or whatever, would start to judge them and be critical. So she said, as long as y'all are going to do that, you can do that if you want, but I'm not comfortable sending you pictures. In other words, I'm going to make a choice for me, and a good limit is always a good choice for me. I'm not going, quit saying that. Good limits are always a rule for me. So we'll touch on the some tomorrow. Is that sort of starting to scratch your itch there, question? Okay. In other words, there's a science to dealing with unrepentant people. That's why you heard my example, the guy who comes in going, like, why'd you invite them to the party? Now, what most victims do is try to explain it or appease them, and then they wonder why they're treated that way. If you answer that person's question, you're giving them a written permission. I, John L. Cox, give you permission to talk to me this way because I'm actually going to answer your question. I want to say, is that a criticism or a real question? Because if it's a real question why I'm inviting them, I'll tell you. But if it's a criticism because you're disdaining me for what I've done, I don't think I want to have that conversation. Do you hear the power in that? I'm not controlling them, I'm controlling me. I'm calling out and pointing at the truth of their destructiveness like God does. I love this field because I started running into it as a Christian. We're supposed to be sweet, right? Because remember, Jesus is just sweet, right? So I had this question because I'm constantly running up against these unrepentant jerks who are in people's lives, and I'm thinking, nobody ever taught me in grad school how do you respond in a Christ-like, loving, powerful way to difficult, hurtful, unrepentant, jerky people. And so I've been making it up for a long time because I'm constantly dealing with it. Half the marriage therapy I do is with the spouse of an unrepentant spouse and teaching them, like, there's always some way in which they're co-signing on the note. This one woman said, my husband's so irresponsible, and he just lays in the bed and makes me get the kids ready, and he won't engage. There's nothing I can do to stop him. And I'm like, wow, that's a toughie. So he's not an aggressive, unrepentant person. He's just kind of a passive, lazy guy. Yeah. And I'm like, well, we got to figure out what's going on there. I'm kind of stuck. I said, tell me a story. When's the last time this happened? She goes, it happened this morning. I'm like, okay, well, tell me the story. And she goes, well, I'll tell you right now. He was still in the bed, and I'd gotten the children out, and I walked in there to bring him his coffee, and I went, whoa, you did what? And I found out there were all these ways she was co-signing this note for him and enabling him to be this passive, lazy guy that she didn't even realize she was doing. So I think I'm not really interested in bringing you coffee and taking such little care of you all the time if you're not willing to be engaged in the family in a more aggressive way. So you get to decide. And he's going to say, well, you're trying to control me. And I would say, what's the victim going to say? No, I'm not. That's defense. I'm going to say, really? Is that your takeaway here? Mirror. Would you like to ask me any questions? Like, am I trying to control you or not? Or do you sound pretty certain I'm trying to control you. Do you just want to stay in your certainty? Or would you like to kind of actually have a conversation about it? I don't really do the call me names, you're being controlling thing. But if you want to get curious together, I'll do that. Do you hear how much I'm in complete control of this conversation? Not of them, but of me. All right? There's a science to it. Difficult people. Check it out. It's my favorite little project. I'm trying to unpack it, flesh it out.
John, I'm hearing that our nursery workers might revolt.
Oh, I'm going to, okay.
Yeah, just from a kid's standpoint, we probably do need to.
As you wish. Questions you have, write them down, save them. Questions you want to text me, feel free. We start at 9 a.m. in the morning. We'll talk intimacy first. We'll do a break. We'll talk conflict. And within conflict, we'll talk about difficult people again, whatever. All right, look, face it. Applaud yourselves because this is a hard, Friday night marriage conference is a buggy whipping. All right? I pushed you hard and you did great. Thank y'all.